I tell people all the time that you'll be amazed at where I will draw inspiration from when it comes to certain commentaries. And with the comments that Laura Loomer made towards Jasmine Crockett, in which she called her a ghetto black bee, that's what actually made me want to do this mini deep dive about hand-me-down stereotypes, better yet known as stereotypes that started with white people that somehow got thrusted upon black people. Now that I have talked about briefly the inspiration, we can go ahead and get old purge face Laura out the paint. When we talk about stereotypes, a lot of people assume they came out of nowhere, that black people somehow created the image of ghetto or lazy or criminal all on their own. But the truth is, many of these stereotypes were not born in black communities. They were created, applied to, and often originated with white or European immigrant communities first, and then eventually thrusted onto black people as if they owned them. Take the word ghetto, and I actually briefly talked about this in the commentary that I did about Laura Loomer and when she called Jasmine ghetto. Originally, this word described Jewish enclaves in Europe. Later in the US, it was used for poor immigrant neighborhoods filled with Irish, Italian, or Eastern Europeans. But by the mid 20th century, the label of ghetto got racialized and stuck onto black neighborhoods exclusively, erasing its original history. The same thing happened with the stereotype of being lazy or welfare dependent. During the Great Depression, most welfare recipients were white, but by the 1960s, through political campaigns, the welfare queen image became a symbol of blackness despite white families still being the largest group on welfare. Crime and violence. In the 19th century and even early 20th century, newspapers called Irish immigrants criminals, Italian mobsters, and Jews racketeers. But fast forward to the late 20th century and criminality is almost automatically associated with blackness. The stereotype of broken families or fatherless homes is another hand-me-down. Irish and Italian households were once mocked as unstable and unfit. Eventually, that stigma was transferred onto black families, becoming a permanent talking point in American politics. Think about education and intelligence. Immigrant groups were ridiculed as dumb, unteachable, or illiterate. Irish people were mocked in cartoons as ape-like and unintelligent. Today, that same idea lives on in the assumption that black people are less intelligent, despite centuries of proof that it's systemic barriers, not ability, that explains disparities. The stereotype of being loud or rowdy followed the same path. Early immigrant neighborhoods were described as noisy, disruptive, and uncivilized. Over time, loud became a weapon against black people, especially black women, to silence them. Hypersexuality was also reassigned. European colonists used that stereotype against Native Americans, then it was applied to enslaved Africans to justify exploitation. Now, black men and black women alike are still portrayed as over-sexualized, dangerous, and very promiscuous. And let's not forget stereotypes around alcohol and drugs. The Irish were labeled as drunkards, Italians tied to bootlegging, Eastern Europeans were mocked for substance abuse. Eventually, the narrative of addiction became pinned on black communities, especially during the crack epidemic of the 80s, even though drug abuse crosses every single race. Even the idea of being natural entertainers but not serious people wasn't original. Irish and Italians were said to be overly musical but undisciplined. Later, this stereotype became cemented onto black people, turning talent into a limitation. Other stereotypes were just as recycled, such as being dirty and unhygienic, that was once used against immigrant families and later against black people, or being barbaric or uncivilized was used on poor whites and immigrants, which was later a greater stereotype or a global stereotype about Africa. Overbreeding or having too many children was thrown at Irish Catholics, and now it's on black women with the baby mama label. Broken English was once a critique of immigrant accents, now it's directed at black Americans with slang, or what some would call, the sophisticated would call, AAVE. What we see is a pattern. Stereotypes were never about truth. They were tools. White society used them to punch down at whichever group they considered undesirable at the time. But once immigrant groups became assimilated into whiteness, those stereotypes didn't just simply disappear. They were repackaged and dropped squarely onto black people who could never escape them because of the permanence of race in America. So when someone says black people are just ghetto or lazy or fatherless or criminals, they're not speaking truth. They're recycling centuries old propaganda that wasn't even originally about us. These labels were created, passed around like a family heirloom, and finally weaponized against Black Americans in a way that still shapes media, politics, and society to this very day. That's why breaking down these stereotypes actually matters. It exposes the lie and shows that the real story isn't even about Black failure. It's about how white supremacy needed scapegoats, and it chose to make Black people the permanent face of stereotypes that were never ours to begin with. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments, and I will talk to you in the next one.